Well, hello, Illinois. My name is Francine Engel, and I am from the state of Maryland. I am a political scientist, and I focus on American constitutional development. And I work with the Maryland Council for Civic and History Education.
And good afternoon. My name is Jocelyn Broman. I currently work on Capitol Hill for Representative Don Young of Alaska. I am a former We the People alum. I am a We the People alumni, not a former We the People alumni. We the People alumni competed at nationals in 2006, which feels like a lifetime ago. And I am also an attorney as well.
My name is Evan Gessner. I'm a civil rights attorney in Lexington, South Carolina. This is my first year judging a national level We the People competition, though I've judged the state level probably about the last 12 or 13 years. I'm excited to be here, and I look forward to your presentation. Good luck.
All right, and if you could introduce yourselves to us, please.
Hi, we're Unit 3 from Maine South High School. Our esteemed coaches are Andrew Jankel and Kevin C. Hansen. I'm Anna Wapner.
I'm Nikki Manolis.
I'm Drew Burgess.
I'm Sydney Lucas.
And I'm Gabby Gavetsky. Thank you for being here with us today.
All right, so I will read the question for you, and then after I'm done, you can begin whenever you're ready. Okay, so we have a quote here from John Adams. It says, quote, "There is nothing I dread so much as a division of the Republic into two great parties, each arraigned under its leader and in opposition to each other," end quote. What issues led to the formation of the original political parties? To what extent have those issues persisted in American political parties? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of a unified or divided government? You may begin when you're ready.
In Federalist Number 10, James Madison expresses that, quote, "The latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, which is exemplified in the formation of political parties and their immense influence on our government." Madison saw the inevitability of political parties in the natural division and discourse within humans. He also wrote in the same paper that, quote, "Liberty is to faction what air is to fire," noting the essentiality of liberty and its connection to the existence of parties.
It was obvious to Madison that parties hold an inherent position within a government. However, to function properly, they must be placed within a system that allows them to flourish. American political parties fuel productive debate, allow deviating views, and promote liberty, all vital functions that can only be preserved through reform of the current two-party system.
In the late 18th century, the formation of faction deemed the beginning of great divide in our nation due to opposing beliefs regarding the power of our federal government and its involvement in the economy. This discourse resulted in the compromises of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The 1800 election saw the first party system of the Federalists and Democratic Republicans, where two factions pitted against each other caused enough turmoil to require an amendment to fix the issues that arose.
Many differences existed between the first parties. Federalists such as Hamilton hailed from the elite class of urban areas, supported a strong federal government, favored close ties with Britain, and wanted the Constitution to be interpreted loosely with implied powers.
In direct opposition, Jefferson and Madison's party hailed from the agricultural areas of the South and frontier, sympathized with France, and wanted a stricter interpretation of the founding document. As Madison feared, the system of political parties within our nation remains deeply divided today. This environment of division, followed by a resulting compromise, would set the stage for the position of political parties within our nation ever since.
While recognizing the natural causes of factions, George Washington famously expressed his fears about a nation divided in foreign entanglements in his farewell address. Despite his warnings, America has continued down the path of polarization, as well as towards seeking, quote, "security and repose in the absolute power of an individual," end quote.
These divisions still exist in conflicting feelings over America's controversial involvement in wars like Vietnam, and when opposing parties take sides in international affairs, such as with Israel and the level of global intervention. Another continuing cause of divide stems from the argument over the power of the central government, specifically to intervene in state actions, individuals' lives, and the economy, all of which are powers that continue to expand during times of adversity, such as the Great Depression. However, we are now more divided than ever as social issues such as abortion and gun control highlight the growing separation in our nation towards levels not seen since the Civil War.
Discourse and division can serve as a directive force for compromise, which a unified government would fail to offer. This sense of liberty, birthed through parties, allows for change to be identified and pursued, as debate and multiple voices are ultimately heard. Were all branches of government affiliated with the same party, the will of the people would be grossly misrepresented.
However, polarization challenges the progression and efforts of parties. On January 6, 2021, opposition within America led to outbreaks of violence rooted in mistrust and hatred, highlighting the influences that parties can have on individuals.
Perhaps the only remedy to the issues regarding the ill competition within the two-party system is a complete structural reform. Money, the weaponization of media, voter suppression, and filibusters are all examples of elements that hinder our nation and government from truly working in the best interest of the people.
From disagreements on the Alien and Sedition Acts to what we see today in the call for racial justice and voter representation, activism through political parties and interest groups is a crucial first step in creating change. While parties are far from perfect, they remain prominent within our country. Without them, our nation would inevitably fall into tyranny and ultimately failure. Thank you. We are now open for questions.
Okay, thank you. So just to start off, could you tell me, do you think factions and political parties are the same thing or are they different?
Factions and political parties really aren't the same thing. What we see today is we really have two main political parties, and we do have some third parties with the Democrats and the Republicans. However, factions are really more separated into these smaller groups of people who hold the same ideals, and therefore there can be multiple factions within a party. A Pew Research Center article suggested that there were 8 of these factions, these political kind of ideologies, where such as Republicans were actually more separated into core conservatives, market skeptics, new era enterprisers, and where some of them, they really do hold different ideals despite being within the same party, such as core conservatives and country first conservatives really feel more negatively towards immigration, whereas new era enterprisers really do like immigration and believe they benefit our nation. So this kind of represents how there are factions that hold similar beliefs within the larger party.
By definition, in Federalist Paper number 10, James Madison describes a faction as a group of people who share this common passion or interest towards something that they are seeking to put their actions in line with. And I think it's also important to connect that this is kind of a group that is putting their interests before the greater common good, which I think is interesting to connect with political parties, because in a time like today when polarization is so high, we might be seeing some similarities with a faction and our political parties.
So you think back to Madison in Federalist number 10, as you were saying, these factions are inevitable. We can't really get rid of them. The best we can do is try to control them. Do you think that we are doing an effective job of controlling our factions in America today?
Unfortunately, I would have to say that we are not doing that effective of a job. At the beginning of 2020 and all throughout that year, I did have hope, considering that both Republicans and Democrats and all those factions within the two of them came together and fought for the Black Lives Matter movement, which they believed that the government was lacking interest in or lacking motivation in. And this actually ended with multiple cities defunding their police, and even Minneapolis going as far as to completely dissolve their police station. But with the events that occurred on January 6th, I think we took an extreme step back.
Let's continue this a little bit. Is polarization the same thing as choosing a political party?
Personally, I don't think that polarization is the same thing as choosing a political party. I think the great thing about having, more than one political party within a country is that people are able to really define their beliefs and identify with a group that aligns with them. But I think that the issue with polarization is this lack of interest in compromise. And with that being said, that really does hinder the progression in our country to really help the American people. We see this notion of party over country, and that is what is stopping the American people from progressing our country to be the best it's ever been.
I absolutely agree with my colleague. I think that people supporting parties is a good thing because it allows and gives people a platform to fight and support issues they feel are important. But I actually think that the issue with polarization today isn't within the parties themselves, but rather the system that we force them to try to compromise within, as well as within our current voting system. And I think one thing that would help combat this would be to abolish the Electoral College, which twice in a single generation has elected a president into office, in 2000 with Bush, and more recently in 2016 with President Trump, who didn't win the popular vote.
To add on to my colleagues' great comments, what we see today is we're on a spectrum. We have Republicans on one end and Democrats on the other end. And the polarization is really making us appear as all of the liberals, all the leftists, we're really over here, and all the conservatives are really over here. When in reality, this is what polarization is. It's making us view us as two separate things. However, in the Culture War, Myth of a Polarized America by Morris Fiorina, he actually argues that many more of us are all across this spectrum than we actually believe. And that's what choosing a political party is. Like where you are on the spectrum, maybe you feel here you have views that really align with the Democratic Party, but there's not all of them. Maybe you have a couple conservative views. And so when you're choosing your party, you say, yeah, I'm a Democrat, but I'm not all the way in the left. But some of these things are making us really appear to be this divided.
So do we need a reform of our electoral system and change it from a winner-take-all system?
I would propose looking at a system, maybe a multi-party system, such as Canada, which practices something called a two-party plus system. And I think one of the biggest failures with our two-party system is that third parties have almost no strength and no power to see their actions go noticed. And in this two-party plus system, the third party actually has the strength to bump off one of the greater two parties. And I think with this, the will of the people is better represented because, as Anna mentioned just before, Americans often have to align with a party that isn't necessarily in tune with their beliefs as much as they would like it to be.
Adding on to my colleague, I definitely agree that I think we need a third party in America today. In fact, in a recent NBC poll, it showed that a majority, 57% of Americans believe that a third party is necessary. And unfortunately, just 38% of Americans feel that our current parties are doing an adequate job.
If that poll is 57%, why don't we have a third party?
I think right now, third parties really just haven't gained a lot of momentum because all they really do is represent the grievances that people have towards the main two parties. Our nation is incredibly split down the middle. 43% of Americans identify as Republicans, with 48% identifying as Democrats. And so it's really hard to gain momentum with third parties because they can't really, because they're often very radical with their beliefs and they can't really gain a large enough following.
Okay.
Adding on to Gabby's point, it really just goes back to the two-party system that we as our country have confined ourselves to. Because as just emphasizing all of my colleagues' points, the issue of polarization is not within the political parties themselves. It's not within having an opinion on politics. It's with having the feeling that you're forced to choose between the two.
So now, can you think of a problem that a third party might bring to the table, or can you think of any historical examples of a third party really creating an issue?
Yeah, so in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, there were populists and progressives, and these tended to be more like kind of farmers, rural areas who didn't feel like they were being represented in their government. And one of the things that they wanted, or a couple of things that are actually here today, are direct elections of senators and progressive income taxes, but that's time.
Great job. Let's recognize the students for their hard work and participation today.
Thank you.
I'm disappointed that we ran out of time because I was interested to hear more of what you're going to say. You're talking about
All John's fault.
yeah. And I know you had more examples there that you were going to give us, and I'm disappointed that we didn't get to hear everything that you have to say there. But you did an excellent job. I really thought you did a fabulous job with the follow-up questions, which really, is very difficult because you have no idea where this conversation may go. but you were very well prepared. You answered the questions very thoughtfully. I thought you did a really nice job with my question about factions and political parties, explaining the difference between the two of them. And your discussion of polarization, I thought was very well done. I really like the example from Morris Fiorina's book that you brought up. And that was a great example. And then, yeah, I really wanted to hear more about this third party. Unfortunately, ran out of time. But wonderful job. Thank you so much for all the effort you put into learning this. You did a great job.
Yeah, you guys did a really excellent job of kind of breaking out this difference between polarization and choosing a political party or political ideology. Like this makes it very complicated and kind of highlights that because we have these two parties, people think that they have to choose one of them. Otherwise, they're absolutely going to lose. And so that was a great, that bringing that in kind of helps to like figure out how this all works. I was hoping to hear a little bit more about our electoral system and how first past the post politics is really kind of makes you want to get over that 50 to that 51% so that you get that person in. Or maybe some of the structural issues of like the percentage of a vote needed in a previous election for a third party to be on the ballot in many states as well. So those kinds of things those like kind of structural things are, well, let's be fair. They're honestly designed by the two main political parties in power to keep the power and to make sure that they can sustain that. Like this is part of the debate we have every 4 years when we have presidential debates, like do the third party candidates get to be on stage with the two major parties? And so these kind of structural things are also part of why we don't have a lot of third parties getting off the ground. So I'd have liked to hear a lot more examples of like those structural things, of how those things have evolved in history over time, because that would just have made your answer that much stronger. But overall, it was a great discussion, and glad we got a chance to hear some examples of third parties. Obviously, we need more time. Even 8 minutes apparently is not enough to do all of this. So it was a great job. So thank you so much.
Absolutely, everyone, great job. There really isn't a lot of time to really delve into everything. And I know earlier today when we were getting started with this judging team, and one thing I had mentioned that I wanted to hear was the Bull Moose Party. And I think when I asked that question, all right, what's a problem that a third party could present? I think you were gearing up to that. And we're going to point out how as it sits in our system and as it sits today, if you had a third party show up, all it's going to do is split the vote on one party and really just to completely change the election, because I don't think Woodrow Wilson ever would have gotten elected if it weren't for Bull Moose Party. So I don't know, maybe we don't need a third party, maybe we need a third and a fourth. But great presentation, everyone. Really, I can tell you all put a lot of time and effort. Really, I think our main issue here today was time, but that's hardly your fault when you've had a bunch of follow-up questions from a very enthusiastic judge. But really, the only pointer, this isn't a critique, just maybe a little bit of advice you want to call it. A lot of our teams, now that we're doing this by video conferencing, you'll have each student on at a separate location. So on our screen, they show up in a separate window. When y'all are together like this, I think it's great. But one of our grading categories is participation. So I look to see if we have even participation from everyone in the group. And with it set up the way it is now, it's at sometimes a little hard to tell which one of y'all is talking. So I just had to lean in and check. Again, not a big deal. It's not going to hold you back here today at all. Just something you might want to think about. But again, great job. Good luck the rest of today.
Great job.
Thank you.
Sorry again that we ran out of time. You guys were really on a roll.
Thank you.
Okay, so the